I destroyed my favorite and most popular folding workbench to build something better. If you're unfamiliar with this workbench, I've built it to fold up into the wall and out of the way, saving a lot of space. And actually a lot of other people have built it too because I have plans available. And for reasons I'll get into, it actually stopped helping my workshop and started hurting it. Although I had a really fun time destroying it, as you'll see, and oh, you will see, my friend, it was really important to me to build something out of its pieces that could be helpful. Magic. Even more magic. Nice. Oh, there's a dowel here. It's also really important to me that the new build pays homage to this workbench, so when I look at it, I can remember all the good times we shared. I'm also, of course, saving all the hardware from this bench so I can use it again in a future project in 2 weeks or 20 years. I mean, why would I throw away a perfectly good bolt? That would just be silly. Also, why would I use the same type of screw when I originally built this workbench? That would just be crazy talk. This is a joke. So it looks like I used one screw with the star drive and the other 23 screws are square drive. So I'm gonna change up my bit. I ended up getting rid of all my square drive screws because I got frustrated having to change out my bits all the time in situations similar to this. So now I just have star drive screws because those are the best and all other screws are bad. Hold on, before you start writing a 3-paragraph comment about why I'm wrong, I'm just joking. We're just having a little fun, having a good time here. I feel like a lot of adults, me included, forget how to have fun and be silly. So I'm bringing that back a little bit by disassembling these legs the most fun and least practical way I could think of, with an axe. I thought I'd start with a little target practice, which you could say did not go well. Not very close to the line, but I thought, you know what? Let's just send it. And let me tell you, I had a blast using this axe. So what am I going to build with these pieces? I'm going to build a sitting bench, and I'm going to use a technique that I've seen online but have never used before. The technique is patterned plywood, and I got the idea for this technique from Michael Alm, who's done a lot of patterned plywood projects on YouTube, but I've never seen anyone use that technique to make a bench like this. And there are not one, not two, actually no, there are 2 reasons, which I'll get into, of why I'm building this specific project as opposed to something different. Patterned plywood is essentially just cutting up plywood into strips, turning those strips 90 degrees so that the plies are facing upward, and then making a cool pattern out of those plywood pieces. Okay, I wanted to show you this because I thought it was wild. So this bag, before I started cutting the plywood, was probably to like here, and it's twice as full as it was before I started cutting it, so a lot of dust. This thing is definitely an upgrade from my shop vac. Good job, Dusty. I absolutely love sharing woodworking tips, so I'm going to be sharing a bunch of tips throughout this project. This build is really weird for me because I've spent years I tell you, trying to hide the plies in plywood, and now it's the feature of this piece. Okay, step 1 is done. We've cut the plywood into 3/4 inch strips. Now step 2, gluing these pieces back together with the plies facing upward. Since I've chosen a chevron plywood pattern, it's important that I'm gluing this up to look like a parallelogram with 45-degree angles on each side, so I waste as little material as possible when I'm cutting it with a track saw. Can I interest you in some chisel glue cleanup? One thing about making YouTube videos is I do a lot of editing, like a lot. Which means I need a comfortable chair so I can be comfortable while I'm sitting at my desk editing these videos. This is my current chair that I've had for the past year, a really cheap chair that I got off of Amazon. It's not that comfortable, and my cat has decided to use it as his own personal scratching post. Okay, out with the old uncomfortable and scratched up, and in with the new comfortable and not scratched up. yet. I would definitely use the word deluxe when describing this chair. It's got a lumbar support that adapts to your back, and the seat is oh so soft, so much cushion. But wait, there's more. Let's talk adaptable armrests. The armrest base rotates 240 degrees, and the armrest itself rotates 360 degrees, which is a lot of degrees. It can come with a footrest, which is nice after a long, tiring day, and can accommodate heights from 5'7" to 6'9", and weights up to 300 pounds. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. FlexiSpot offers a 30-day return policy and a 5-year warranty for damaged parts. If you sit for a long time and are looking for an adjustable ergonomic chair, check out the FlexiSpot C7 Max. Now back to the video. Tip number 2, make these pieces slightly narrower than the maximum width of your planer so you can just run these bad boys through. This saved me a lot of sanding time, like a lot. I ended up having enough plywood for 2 of these pattern plywood pieces, and I was going to just add a middle shelf to this bench, but in the end I decided against it, and it was a good choice, unlike milk at times.
Milk was a bad choice.
I'm cutting this long piece into thirds, making it a lot easier to run through the table saw, and I cut the end of my push stick at a 45-degree angle to make the table saw work easier as well. So I'm in the middle of cutting these out on the table saw, and 3 of these pieces in a row came apart as if there was no glue on the inside. And then this piece just came apart. Luckily not while I was cutting it, but I'm gonna need to re-glue this. And you saw I put a ton of glue on these pieces during the glue up. You can go back in the video, you'll see the footage is all there. But sometimes wood just likes to be real silly. So I'll put some more glue on this, no big deal. I used wood glue along with CA glue and accelerator spray to put these pieces back together. It worked great. Now on to the most important tip in this entire video. I just did something really dumb, and you might be thinking, how dumb could it be? Well, really dumb is the correct answer. I was cutting the lower shelf pieces, and I just cut them in straight lines again, not slanted sections. Here's what I mean. I'm supposed to obviously cut these pieces like this so that the plies are slanted, and then when I rotate every other piece, it makes a really cool chevron pattern. What I did for the middle shelf pieces was I cut them so they're still straight lines. Do you see what happens when I rotate every other piece? They're still straight lines. Now this is the type of silliness that we don't want. So I literally now have to glue these pieces back up, make another 45-degree cut with my track saw, and then cut them on the table saw. If I don't laugh, I'd cry. It's really not a huge deal. It just adds time, and I'm already really slow building stuff, so this is just a little bit of a bummer. I'll fix that mistake with the middle shelf off camera. Now it's time to glue up the pieces for the bench top. Here is where this piece really comes alive, like Victor Frankenstein once said.
It's alive, it's alive!
This is cool. I mean, I've already seen this pattern, so I don't know why I'm so taken aback, but it just looks so freaking cool, excuse my language, seeing it in person. Okay, let's get this thing glued up. As I said earlier, I'm already really slow at building things, and what I've learned during this pattern plywood project is there are a lot of steps, and a lot of those steps include gluing. And I like to let my glue joints dry for 24 hours, so this project took a little longer than anticipated. Since some of the plywood pieces were literally just breaking in half as I was cutting them on the table saw, I knew it would not be strong enough on its own for people to sit on. Call me old-fashioned, but I like my benches to not be single-use items and break immediately when someone sits on them, so I decided to glue the pattern plywood piece to a sheet of 3/4-inch plywood. But since apparently I can't stop being silly like all the time, I made the plywood piece too big and frantically tried to fix it as the glue is drying. And this is actually really important because if I don't cut it to a similar size as the top piece of plywood, I won't get enough clamping pressure all around the piece. If you're wondering why I'm not showing the process of making the extra pattern plywood piece that I was going to use for the middle shelf, it's because I'm doing the exact same thing I'm doing here to the bench top. And that extra piece is going to fill a void I've had in this workshop for quite some time. But I guess if you really want to, you can just re-watch all this footage and pretend it's for that other piece. Did you happen to catch that unnecessary track saw cut? I know you did, you're super smart. Did you also happen to catch that I didn't lock down my table saw fence before I made this big cut? You know what I was being? Silly. I just can't stop. Okay, it's time to put some curves on this piece. So I'm going to use my laser, pew pew, to cut a template to make my life a lot easier. Paul over at Copper Pig did some research, and if you know Paul, that is classic Paul, always researching, and found studies that showed people prefer curves over straight lines when it comes to furniture. And since I'm people and you're people, I thought, what the hey, let's add some curves. Let me know in the comments if you agree with the research. Do you prefer curves in furniture, or are you a hard angle, straight line kind of person? After using my jigsaw to cut close to the line, I'm using my router with a flush trim bit and the template to finish it off. Now I know not everyone has a laser cutter, so you could easily make this template with a stationary belt sander like this rigid one that I have. It would just take longer. I used every inch of that plywood workbench tabletop for this project. Okay, that may be a bit of a lie. I used most of the inches of that plywood tabletop for this project, but for the base, I'm only going to need about half of the workbench base. If you're going to make legs for anything, I encourage you to use stop blocks for repeatable cuts so all the legs will be the exact same length. If you don't, you're gonna have a bad time. This whole base is going to be put together using half laps and pocket hole joinery. I could have absolutely used other joinery methods, but I chose these two for a very specific reason. I felt like it. I've really been liking showing the parts of my shop that I try and hide in the video, so this is my real shop. Look at me being all vulnerable. So how am I going to pay homage to the wall-mounted folding workbench that I destroyed earlier in the video? For one, these leg structures are actually very similar to the workbench legs, but more importantly, me not including a pattern plywood middle shelf allowed me to include something else that more closely tied this to the workbench. The workbench design has a lower support stretcher that prevents the legs from folding in when the bench is in use. So I decided to add that here, and that is the next piece I'm going to be cutting to size on the miter saw and then cutting the half flaps on the table saw. When I built the wall-mounted folding workbench, which I don't know if you recall I destroyed with an axe earlier in the video, it was great because it allowed me to store my workbench on the wall when I wasn't using it and gave me so much more room in my shop to assemble large furniture pieces. So how was it hurting my woodworking? Well, my shop is pretty small, it's 198 square feet, and this workbench was pretty big. And so I found myself not really using it because it was too large for my space, and it lived on the wall and I didn't take it down very often. So it basically became a really big, albeit awesome, wall hanging, taking up valuable wall space that could be used for a storage solution. And as I've accumulated more tools and accessories over the years, I've had nowhere to put them. So now that the workbench is gone, I have something planned pretty dang awesome for that wall space. I normally don't stain my projects, but because this base is pine, and between you and me, I think pine is pretty dang ugly, I decided to stain it, but I went with a very specific color. A few years ago, a friend of mine who's a really talented stylist and has an eye for interior design told me about this stain color called Early American. So I've had that in the back of my head for a few years, which is the last time I've stained a project. So I decided to use that color on this base. The thing I find hilariously ironic about this project is I'm literally accentuating the plies. This is a pattern plywood project, but I am still adding hardwood edge banding. But not very well, I might add. Please enjoy the next few seconds of me trying and failing. Ooh, maybe some CA glue with accelerator will help. There we go, Thomas. Add a clamp, now we're getting somewhere. It is comical how many clamps I ended up using on this one side of edge banding, but I made up a brand new phrase that I think is very poignant here. You gotta do what you gotta do. One of the issues I run into in my shop is a lot of the storage solutions I have are drawers. There's nothing wrong with drawers, but a lot of times drawers can get overfilled. Not that I would know anything about that. So I've decided to use that wall space for open storage in the form of a French cleat wall. Okay, real quick tip. Timbermate is an awesome wood filler that comes in a bunch of different colors and is non-shrinking, so there'll never be gaps.
It shrinks?
I think a French cleat wall is the way to go, so my tools and accessories can be out and about ready to grab. But if you disagree, leave a comment below telling me what you think I should put on that wall. And realistically, I probably won't take your advice, but you never know. I cannot wait for you to hear about the 2 reasons of why I chose to build this sitting bench, but all will be revealed in due time. But first, the other pattern plywood project I was working on is a sign that says, The Wood Shop. I thought it was pretty fitting. And ever since I built the DIY 5-tiered shelving unit, there's been a blank space right above it on the wall that would be perfect for a sign of this size. So with the help of my laser, I made this sign, which turned out to be the bee's knees, as the kids currently say. No cap. For this sign and for the bench base, I just used rattle can lacquer, which is my go-to finish for things that are not going to take a ton of abuse because it's really, really easy to apply. Another thing that's the cat's pajamas are leveling feet, because no floor in the history of the world has ever been level. That's a fact, don't look it up. So leveling feet are definitely a hero without a cape. Let me finally introduce you to the 2 reasons why I made a multi-person bench for my workshop. I would like you to meet my 2 little girls, Ash and Maple. That's not the real names, but now that I say them out loud, they don't sound too bad. If they want to hang out with Daddy in the shop, now they have a place to sit that's not too high off the ground. This project ignited a bit of a fire in my belly, and now I want to try some different patterns with plywood. So please, 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 it would help me out a ton if you commented down below with what you would like to see me build with pattern plywood. A big thank you to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video, and they have a Black Friday sale coming where you can get discounts on standing desks, ergonomic chairs, and more. Use my code to save an extra $50 on the C7 Max chair. You can also win free orders with this activity calendar.